Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the Flying by the Seat of Our Pants Bird Festival. This is in replacement of our in-person Bird Festival for the Morro Bay Winter Bird Festival. And tonight's presentation is 45 tips in 45 minutes by Mark Mushkat. So before we get started, just a couple of announcements. We will be recording this meeting, and you may even have a thing on your screen that says the meeting is being recorded, just to let you know. There are a few Zoom functions that we will not be using during this session. For example, all of you are muted. Can you imagine if we have a couple hundred people who can talk whenever they feel like it? It would be disaster. So it's just the way it is with so many people. There are going to be some mutings. We also will not be recognizing anyone with a raised hand function. So just don't even bother pushing that raised hand function because we are not going to recognize it. Now, we will have the chat function open, but what we would really like to do so you don't distract us or the presenter, if you could just hold your questions for the end, because the only thing we are going to use the chat function for tonight is if you have a question for the presenter. And that will be good if you start thinking about those questions through the program, and at the end, I will be looking at those questions and I will be asking the presenter your questions. So to only use the chat function for questions, and in fact, let's do that later on in the program. We have a couple other notes, and one of them is all these presentations are free, and that's pretty cool. But if you're able to make a donation, we would appreciate it. We're all volunteers, but it does take money to restart a festival. And if you want to see an in-person festival next year, we will need donations to cover the losses that happen from such a last-minute cancellation. So we've made many ways possible for you to donate. If you want to donate the old-fashioned way, writing a check, haven't done that in a while. You want to write a check and mail it to us, you can do that. Or you can go to our website, and there's a donation link right there. It connects to PayPal, and you can make a link. Or at the end of the show, just like you saw at the beginning of the show, we will have a closing slide, and there are these squiggly little QR codes. It's an amazing world we live in. You can just hold your phone up to that QR code, and you can make a quick donation either through PayPal or Venmo, however you like. By the way, the Venmo limit is $299, so if you're looking to make a bigger donation, click on the PayPal QR code. So now on to our program. So here's the story. The meeting is going to be recorded, and hopefully we'll have that up on our website in a few days. But tonight's presenter is Mark Mushkat. Now, Mark was lured into a lifetime of birding when he was watching tens of thousands of raptors daily on the shores of Lake Ontario in 1979. He was inspired by these large, dramatic birds of prey, and then, like most of us, you learn how to identify the big ones, then you get smaller and smaller until you finally get down to that dreaded stage of the LBJs, those little brown jobs. So his efforts at researching and photographing and teaching about birds have led him to 30 different countries, and he's seen over 3,000 avian species across the continents and across the decades. So he's retired from a business career, but he stays active in the birding community like most of us with eBird submissions. He takes pictures and he does app consulting, and he shares the pleasures of birding with others who are interested in bettering their skills. He's a board member of the local Audubon Society, which is, in his case, is the Golden Gate Audubon. And we're really looking forward to hearing what Mark has to say. And again, tonight, 45 tips in 45 minutes. And if he talks fast and ends early, we get to ask him a few questions and answers. So this is the very first of the Fly by the Seat of Our Pants Bird Festival. Mark, take it from here. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks for the introduction. We are going to focus on ways to become a better birder, and I haven't counted the tips. I think there are at least 45. And I know it's just the beginning of the tip universe. There are a lot more than 45 smart things to do to become a better birder, but you'll find some on your own. I hope this is a good start for some of you, and you're inspired by some of this. The goal is to share what I've learned, the tips that have made a big difference for me. And I've learned them from really great birders all over the world over 4+ decades now. We're going to discuss these tips along a number of categories, and here are the broad category headings, and you'll hear me repeat them as we go through them. We're going to talk about equipment, planning a birding event, a bird hike, for instance, arriving at the bird site, spotting birds, and then identifying species. And then we're going to talk about listing what you found, journaling your bird experiences, and posting so others can learn from what you've seen. And lastly, we're going to discuss background efforts. And as Chris said, we should have 5 to 10 minutes at the very end for Q&A. So the first chapter, if you will, is on equipment. And it's obviously one of the most important to have great optics out there. Issues around budget, weight of the binoculars, what power to choose, waterproof matters, and light gathering are absolutely key in selecting the right binoculars for you. Generally, when people use compact binoculars like these guys, they're really light. They can tuck nicely into a pocket or a backpack. They're not great for birding. They're really good for sports events or concerts and the like, which is where I use these. But for birding, you want more light gathering ability, and you want a field of view that's not like this, but it's more like that. And binoculars that are compact tend to have a really narrow field of view. This is a lot easier, and the 7 and 8 power binoculars will give you this, and then as you get close to 10, it starts to narrow some. But the other side of that is how much light they gather. That's really important, not necessarily because you're birding at dawn and dusk, but sometimes in a forest, looking at some leaves off in the background and being able to pick out details because of light gathering is really valuable to have. For some birders also, having binoculars that allow you to bring cups up like this when you don't wear eyeglasses and fold them down when you do can be really valuable. You can learn a lot by going to a store and trying different binoculars. Bird festivals quite often have a table or two where you can check out binoculars. You can talk to fellow birders. There are really great reviews online. Publications often will have a review of recent developments in the binocular world. Overall, prices have come down over the years and quality has gone up. So this is a really great time to get superb binoculars for a reasonable amount of money. Some birders aren't aware of the fact, especially new birders, that the right eyepiece, the right barrel here, focuses separately from the left barrel if you want it to. And that's really important for creating a stereoscopic view so that the image comes together in a really brilliant 3D image. These adjust that view by having this piece come up right here. It differs. Some have a dial on the right barrel. It's easy to learn online. YouTube almost certainly will have a video of how to adjust the right diopter to create a focus that's stereoscopic when the left barrel is also brought into play. In the field, also, I think it's really valuable to have a recording device, and almost every smartphone now has that. In some cases, you can supplement that with your own microphone. Here's an example for my iPhone. That's a more sensitive mic. These also have been getting better and better for lesser and lesser amounts of money. Some are shotgun style microphones where you might have to point at a sound, but it's really valuable for creating better audio files. And we'll talk more about how you can use those later on. Also, a lot of birders now are using medium power digital cameras, sometimes high power digital cameras with at least a 300mm lens and carrying an extra battery with them. This is really valuable in the field, assuming it's safe to get it out there, given water issues, for instance, or carrying it in your car, or just where you're going birding, and whether it's safe to have an expensive camera with you. When you're in the field and using a camera like that, you can study photos of distant birds. You can zoom in on the photos dramatically and maybe get some idea of what you're looking at and how important that is to you. It can be time saving, it can be really satisfying, and it can help you find some birds that are quite extraordinary. So I highly recommend getting to learn how to use a digital camera in that way. Also, scopes have been around for a long time. Like binoculars, they've come down in price and gone up in quality. A lot of different ones on the market, like binoculars, they're reviewed and you can test them at festivals and in stores and the like. My preference is for an angled eyepiece like this. And as you can see, it rotates so that people that you're with might be able to get a look at the bird without having your height. So sometimes I've even put this high up on a tripod, turned it completely around like this, stood below it, looking up into the eyepiece, and just that extra couple of inches above my head were enough for me to get a look at the bird. That would be harder to do with a straight scope as opposed to this angled one. For scopes also, one issue is that the eyepiece is a zoom lens, and it can range from 25 power to 75 or 80 power, for instance. A lot of people want to magnify a bird 50 or 70 times what the eye could pick up. That's an attractive idea, but you give up a lot of light when you do that. And sometimes it's better to have much more light and detail with lower magnification than to have the reverse. So it's not too often that you're going to use the really high powered magnification, and you're going to spend most of your time around 25 or 35x with your zoom lens on a scope. Also, I think it's valuable to keep in your backpack or your car cleaning material. So here's a can of compressed air that's super helpful for cleaning dirt off of a lens. I also carry a feather with this quite often to brush anything that doesn't come loose when I spray. And then I keep a towelette like this guy. I'm not a big fan of microfiber cloths. I know they're out there. I think it's easy for them to trap dirt also, and then you're smearing a beautiful lens with a cloth that might have some dirt particles and can scratch it. So I avoid touching it wherever I can, and that's why I use a feather or maybe a sable brush to get the last bits of dirt off before applying a towelette that I use once like this and then dispose of it. I'm really OCD around my lenses and want to keep them in great shape for decades to come. So the hair on my neck kind of raises when I see somebody taking a shirt and wiping the binocular lens with it and praying that there's not much damage going on, but to each his own. Let's talk for a moment about clothing and hats, shoes, things like that. Obviously, you want to have layers when you're in the field. Temperature changes can be pretty extreme in some places. Water resistant or waterproof can be really helpful in some locales. Pelagic trips in particular, if you want to do that. There's an effort toward having participants on a trip, and maybe even if you're by yourself, you want to think about clothes that don't produce much noise. I know it sounds like a strange thing, but a lot of nylon and waterproof jackets and the like are pretty noisy when movement is going on, and they rustle quite a bit, and it can alert birds and distract others who are with you as they're trying to look at something and they're hearing clothes rustling. And then there's some controversy around colors, but I prefer to err on the really neutral, kind of dull side, using tans and browns. If any color outside of that. It might be a dark green that mimics foliage. I don't think you have to go to the extreme of camo, but some people do, especially with something like a hat. Hats are valuable for kind of hiding your face or your head, especially if there's glare. As you can see here, a hat is terrific for that. It also keeps my head from getting scratched by branches, given my height. And as some brown pelicans taught me at Morro Rock last year, it's really useful for keeping bird poop off my face and off my head as they flew overhead, dozens of them, and decided to release on me. Hats don't prevent hair loss, which is kind of sad, but it's just a fact. Regarding shoes, waterproof again is really valuable. It's super easy to step into a puddle or lose your footing on a stream and step down into the water, and having waterproof shoes, water resistant socks, wicking socks, that's super helpful. Good ankle support is key, given the instability of some trails, especially for older birders, where you might be stepping over logs, on rocks, and wanting that extra ankle support. And in some locales, I think you want to tuck your pants into your socks. Birders luckily aren't known for being terribly fashionable, so it's not a huge problem to look a little dorky out there with that tucked in, but it's really helpful for insect issues. Insect repellents, I think, are key. Everything from sulfur powder that I've used to minimize ticks and chiggers and leeches, to spray-ons and lotions that you can rub on. Sunscreen is also really important to protect your skin. I've been to a lot of great birding spots, and many of them have pretty serious insect problems. At least from my perspective. It's not a problem from the bird's perspective. It can be really great birding where there are lots of insects, but I've had mosquito, chigger, and tick issues. In Thailand many years ago, I was at a campsite where I noticed dozens of leeches were on the ground, orienting their bodies, standing up and changing their body position to face me as they picked up the heat from my body, and they were looking for a warm meal. And then one day in Mexico, unfortunately, I visited the botanical gardens, and I walked out with more than 100 chigger bites. So I've learned these lessons somewhat the painful way. Backpacks and fanny packs are terrific, especially for long outings. They can carry some of the equipment I've talked about: extra sunscreen, insect repellent, food, extra battery for your camera, all of these things. Regarding food and drink, I think it's really helpful to have some extra food with you. Again, quiet food, if you will. So, minimizing wrappers, maybe unwrapping something before you head into the field. Whatever you carry in, you carry out. So you might want to keep a extra bag there for banana peels or orange or apple cores or orange peels and the like. And that would hold your water bottle. You might keep electrolytes if it's a long hike. And then for pelagic trips, if you're going to get out to sea, some birders like to have a thermos with a hot liquid, and they keep ginger snaps or ginger candies to help with motion sickness. The next chapter is birding locations. Where to go birding? Where are the best spots? People don't want to waste their time traveling out somewhere and having it be absolutely dead. So we're always looking for really good hot spots to bird in, and you'll learn them over time. But in every case, safety is the most important element in your bird location. Increasingly, we're finding break-ins and even stick-ups at some spots as people are coming back to their cars or getting out of their cars. Some spots on the Central Coast where I'm located are known break-in spots, so birders are extra careful, not leaving anything visible for somebody to smash and grab. And if the situation looks the least bit iffy, especially if you're alone, aren't other cars around, you might think about coming back another day, coming back with some friends, and trying to park in really obvious, well-trafficked places to minimize the chance that somebody would have a good smash and grab moment. and just even look around the car to see what might be there. If it looks like it might be a somewhat sketchy location, I would suggest not even getting out of the car, holding binoculars, cameras, and the like, but moving on and returning another day. As you arrive at a location like that, look around for other birder vehicles. They're sometimes pretty easy to spot given license plates or bumper stickers. And birders may be standing nearby, or you'll know to look for them if they are nearby. I think really valuable to ask, what have you seen? Where did you see it? How long ago? Those sorts of things. You can ask about the safety of the location, especially as the day may be getting longer, and whether you really need to be back well before sunset, for instance. An interesting technique that I learned from a local birder who gets out of his car in a safe location, he scatters seeds around the car. He keeps some bird seed with him, mixed seed, and he scatters a handful around the car, and then he goes off and does some birding. When he returns, quite often he finds some birds feeding on the ground near his car, looking for the seed that he sprinkled, and he can add a couple of extra birds to his day list that might have been watching from the woodlands as he walked away, and they came in to investigate what was there and started feeding on the seed that he sprinkled. Locally, you can start in some really easy places. If you're in a city, just looking out a window, looking at trees around the neighborhood, looking up in the sky for gulls and hawks and pigeons and the like. If you're not in a urban location, suburbs have great parks, so do big cities. And if you're lucky enough to have a garden, you might have some feeders up. These are really great places to start studying birds in greater detail than maybe you're used to. You might just be used to identifying them a little bit and feeling comfortable with one or two species around the yard or the city street. But with a little concentration and effort, you can start to find more species and start to study behavior a little bit more and watch plumage changes over the years or over a year as birds come in and out of breeding season or as juveniles come up into adult plumage. Local parks are superb. Botanical gardens are superb. If you keep bird feeders up and keep them clean and have healthy food for them, you can bring birds in really closely for naked eye observation and get some great sound recordings or just hear wonderful vocalizations. And then for photography and for drawing, that's a really good way to attract birds and then be able to study them. I mentioned botanical gardens a minute ago. I've learned that you can pretty much go to any major city on planet Earth and they're going to have a really nice botanical garden in great shape. It can be a relatively safe space. It can be really good for photography, for drawing, for attracting lots of different birds because of the different plants. And there's seeds and fruit and sometimes insects they attract that can bring in some really terrific bird life. And it's relatively safe as well, quite often, given other parts of the city. Your local bird group, whether it's an Audubon chapter or some other organized birding organization, can provide you with a lot of resources around what are some of the better hotspots. There's a lot of word of mouth among birders about what's being seen where. Sometimes there are local email groups that you can join for information, your own experience, local publications. There's just a wealth of resources online and off around where to find good birds not far from you. One of the best resources on the planet is eBird. This is a Cornell University project that is at the heart of a citizen science effort, the likes of which has never been seen before. eBird has a lot of great features. Their website will show you really wonderful birding places nearby and what's been seen there, when it was seen. You can filter it according to different times of the year and over the last 10 years or just the last year. All sorts of great customizations possible off of eBird. Again, it's free, although they really appreciate donations. It's a very expensive project to keep running. It's one of the most important ornithological projects going on planet Earth right now. I would encourage all of you who haven't yet been on a pelagic trip or who took one years ago to get out there and to take a trip. It's really extraordinary, the things you see, the behaviors you see. Nothing on terra firma matches what can happen on a pelagic trip, and the excitement of an albatross or shearwaters or migrating terns, for instance. They can be a little more challenging, sometimes a lot more challenging than a earthbound, a landbound trip. But it's worth it. You can, for most people that you can handle motion sickness, there are great medications such as Dramamine or scopolamine, also known as the patch. And most pelagic leaders will give you really good guidelines for clothing, for food, for equipment, and for medication. You'll meet other birders. You'll learn a great deal. You'll sharpen a lot of skills, and you will never forget your first pelagic trip. Wherever you're going, however you're planning it, questions should always pop up around the weather conditions and what you should prepare for. It's important to think about sunlight, where the sun is going to be. For instance, in some settings, you don't want to be observing into the sun if you can help it. You want to know about what precipitation is looking like now and later in the day. Issues around wind, because a lot of birds in heavy winds tend to stay low, and it's very hard to see in a forest that's windy any kind of movement. So that might affect your decision on where to go and what you might see. If you're in a coastal community like I am, tidal changes are really important, especially for estuaries where you might see a 5-foot change in tidal height. Also, some rivers can change dramatically after storms, for instance, or if there's a dam release upstream. And lastly, mud and snow. People have gotten stuck in mud and needed to get towed out. I once slid off of an icy road into a ditch, and a local farmer was kind enough to pull me out, and that can be really helpful. But a little better planning on my part would have prevented that from being a problem. And as you're looking at a site or sites to go to, think about how it changes throughout the year. Given migration, and whether it's a non-migrating time of year, or is it just starting up migration? Would it be better to wait a couple of weeks or a couple of months? Is it a really interesting nesting area? Going now and then going again in April to see what's happening with breeding behavior might be really valuable, and planning out some strategies around identification and learning behavior in that way, I think is really nice. And the conditions may be more favorable down the road rather than doing it tomorrow. The next chapter is spotting birds. Minimizing disturbance is really important. You'll see a lot more if you're as unobtrusive as possible. That applies to both the visual and the auditory realms. I like to try to use a natural blinds, so standing behind a shrub or a tree trunk, not letting all of my body be apparent to a bird, and sitting and standing patiently can make a world of difference. Just being quiet and waiting quite often will start bringing in bird noises followed by bird activity and birds getting closer for you to have good sightings. I'll never forget being in Salineno, Texas, many years back, having just observed brown jays at a mobile home park in Salineno, when a fellow pulled up and got out and started asking me if I'd seen any brown jays, and I said I had. He spent 5 to 7 minutes nonstop telling me how frustrated he was, in a really friendly way and kind of humorous, that he had tried again and again and again and again and again to find brown jays and never could find him. And after 5 to 7 minutes of me being silent and him talking, he got back in his car, drove off, and within 3 minutes, brown jays reappeared. So I learned a little something from that. If birds are nesting or in breeding behavior, even more sensitivity is required to minimize disturbance and not upset a breeding effort. As we know, bird populations are in pretty steep decline, And I think it's incumbent on every bird or anybody who cares about birding, cares about conservation, to be really careful not to upset any kind of nesting that's going on, and even more so for threatened and endangered species. In particular, people love to chase down and get close to owls and other birds of prey with photography or recording equipment, or just to get really close views. It can be really damaging to get too close. And so we need to be super careful about the vulnerability of some of these super sensitive species. And that's true for nesting season and non-nesting times as well. I want to talk a little bit about spishing, squeaking, imitating bird calls, and recordings, playbacks of the bird itself, or a recording from an app. This is a pretty controversial topic. We know it can be really damaging activity, so a lot of caution is advised here. You can read up on it. You can look at guidelines that are published in some websites around these sorts of disturbances. If you're gonna use any of these techniques, such as spishing or squeaking or imitating or recording, do so really sparingly, please. It can really upset birds. You would see that, and so sometimes, you know, a very brief spish or squeak might bring up birds, and that's all you need to do. You don't need to go further than that. If you're going to play a recording, you know, play a call for just a couple of seconds and then stop and watch what happens over the next few minutes. If you're to the point where you need to play a song to bring in a bird, it's almost certain that you're doing more harm than good, and you may drive the bird off of that territory and damage a breeding opportunity. If you're a little bit new to birding, you can gain a lot of experience by starting with larger and easily seen species, species that may not move a lot. Waterfowl in particular come to mind. Wading birds such as herons and egrets are pretty easy to start with and study. You can draw them. They're stable enough. Photographs are easy. You can really deepen your skills with these easy to see birds, and think about plumage and relative sizes and their behaviors, listen for vocalizations. And then as they get airborne or they're coming in flight, you can practice your binocular skills, keeping them in focus and following them as they land or get more distant. Sometimes that will trigger other behaviors. If thousands of shorebirds are getting airborne and you're following them, you might, as you follow, you might see a peregrine falcon start to come in hunting the shorebirds, which is why they got to the air in the first place. These birds are great, as I mentioned, for photography and drawing. In photography, there's really great software available now for most smart devices and on computers, and much of it is free. You can buy some really first-rate, world-class software for photography use. By practicing with this and uploading some of your photos to eBird, you increase eBird's library of great photographs, and you can also do the same with really good audio files, ways to clean those up with software, and then upload to eBird. Obviously, you want to be confident enough in your sightings. You don't have to have great photos or the best audio files to do that, but you want to do the best you can in getting those files online. And as your skills improve, you can then start to work on more difficult large species like gulls, birds of prey, even pigeons and doves. In some locations that can be a little more challenging and good to get some more skills in. Learning what species are expected in your area, it's a really helpful way for you to learn more about what you should expect out there, and just sort of having a basic library of birds that are kind of around all the time or certain times of year will alert you to a bird that's suddenly appearing out of the norm, and how you can pay attention to that and maybe have a pretty special sighting. And then as you get more confident with these larger species, it gets easier to start working your way down to warblers and tanagers, flycatchers, and sparrows. And then if you're really brave, the more difficult gull species, which we'll leave others to discuss. When you're out birding with other people, sometimes it's really helpful to think about where to look for birds, using a clock face metaphor for a tree or a shrub, and saying, you know, the bird is at 3 o'clock in that tree, or it's 2 feet in from 7 o'clock, will help people get on the bird. Sometimes being creative with strategies to get a better view or photograph. Blinds or hides can be really helpful at wetlands. Some places have towers and observation decks. I've brought a chair to some locations if I expect to be sitting for a long time at a hawk watch or a sea watch, for instance. And even for something like canopy specialist birds, sometimes birders will lie on the ground or lie on a bench to avoid the dreaded warbler neck, and be able to sit for long periods or lay for long periods and look at birds overhead. And sometimes birds can lead you to birds. Crows, ravens, and jays will quite often mob predators nearby, and they'll alert you that something is in the neighborhood and you should be paying attention. And in woodlands, songbirds will often do the same thing, flitting around predators and giving you a hint that there may be something to look for. Without getting too close, you might be able to identify a hawk or an owl in a tree as the bird's getting mobbed. For identification, we live in a pretty amazing age of smart device apps, and there are great ones out there to help with ID, field guides and the like. Merlin, again, published by Cornell, is a really terrific app where you can describe a bird and it will likely come back with the right identification. You can upload a photo, it will do the same thing. You can upload an audio file, it will most of the time come back with the right ID. Other applications that do this include BirdNet, and these are all great resources to improve your skills at identification and help you learn more about bird life. A lot of great electronic field guides that are just replete with great images, descriptions, range maps. Even just sitting at home, leafing through those and learning more about what you might expect on a trip tomorrow, or what you saw earlier in the day, looking at sonograms and reading sound descriptions. When you get home, you know, you can have specialty books like, you know, Warblers of the Americas, or just you know, a big edition of a field guide. See if I can get that in focus somehow here. Those sorts of things can be really helpful, that you wouldn't carry in the field because they're too heavy, but having a library of these sorts of books is really helpful. I mentioned eBird a couple of times. They have photographs by the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, and you'll be able to get a much deeper dive. They also have audio files, and even places like Wikipedia, Cornell's Birds of the World can provide you with quite a bit more information as well. Regarding rarities, everybody wants to see and be the first to see a rarity if you can. I suggest you try to be cautious on the really conservative side. I was once told, if you hear hoof pounding in a forest, you think horses, not zebras. This holds really true for birds. Before reporting a rarity, do everything you can to rule out more common species. It's easy to confuse common species with something rare because it may be leucistic or melanistic. It may be a juvenile that you're not used to seeing. It may be a bird that's in a midst of a molt, and the plumage is quite different. Most of the time, 99% of the time, it's not a rarity, and you'll learn a lot by figuring out that it's not. So be really cautious in that regard. And your eBird, a regional editor, will also help you in justifying your sighting. Any documentation like a photograph or a really detailed drawing can be helpful in proving that it's a rarity, and a really good verbal description, written description. Listing, journaling, and posting are really valuable things to do. Keeping life lists, county lists, state lists, challenging yourself. Some people have in a community a challenge around other birders each year for their county list, and it keeps them in the field a lot. I've seen people keeping a green list, birds seen without using any kind of fuel other than human muscle. I know of a app that's in development called Flock that's going to allow friends to create a competition among themselves for a specific time period, a specific location, and then maybe target families of birds like waterfowl or birds of prey or sparrows. Some people keep journals, daily journals of what they've seen, and they do it over the years, and they come back again and again to read what they've seen before and use that for maybe planning the birding and comparing year over year. And then I mentioned earlier, some local communities have birding hotlines, something like GroupMe or a Yahoo group, where you can join and learn what's being seen in real time, and quite often arriving at a scene where a lot of birders are already on the bird or they're looking for it, and you can learn from them what they're looking for and why it's valuable. And the last section here, and I'll try to leave a little time for Q&A, just all the resources that are out there. YouTube has classes. These festival videos will be on a website for people to come back to over time. Many chapters have speakers and field trips that you can join and be out with more experienced birders. There are great books and magazines. A lot of the local chapters provide their efforts at little or no cost. Again, they really appreciate donations to help defray some of their expenses. And if you're a little more experienced, you might think about leading a trip for others. It's a great way to sharpen some of your skills around communication and getting people on birds and talking about why this is an important conservation issue, bringing up issues around climate change and how it affects insects, how it affects birds. And now people are in the midst of seeing something they've only heard about. And then look to create some partnerships with people with comparable skill. Try to get out with more experienced birders by inviting them to join you at some point, or can you join them and learn from them? And if you're going to travel somewhere, think about hiring a local guide. It helps the community, and you'll find some new habitats that maybe you've never seen before, like a rainforest, and your skills will improve there. And then lastly, there are things like Christmas bird counts and breeding bird surveys that you can join to improve your skills and maybe get experience with birders at the intermediate and advanced levels. With that, I'll stop. I know there's not much time, but maybe a question or two, Chris, we can take here. And thanks to everybody for tuning in.
Okay, thanks, Mark. I will open up the chat, and if anybody would like to write a question or two in the chat, that's great. Otherwise, I would like to say that I really appreciate the fashion tips. That one about hair loss, and hats. That was very important to me to hear.
Yeah, critical.
And so that's great. I wanted to point out a couple of other things that you mentioned going off. Boy, I don't know if that was 45 tips or not. That was like 800 tips. That was fantastic. Learned a lot. You mentioned about hiring local guides. Some of the people that we hired for to be masterclass leaders or keynote leaders, we were going to pay them. And so if you're looking for a guide in New Mexico, Ray Von Buskirk is somebody you can touch base with, or locally, Don Quintana is leads great trips all over. So yeah, hiring those local guides is really good. Let me see. I don't see any questions in the chat. Oh, here we go. We got a question right here. Let me open it up. It says, I have not heard about using sulfur powder for repelling insects. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, I think you can find sulfur powder now online. Some pharmacies carry it. I think it's really effective for ticks. If you want to avoid spraying pyrethrins, for instance, on your clothing, my understanding is sprinkling with sulfur powder ticks and chiggers. It's a really good repellent, and it's worked for me. I just sprinkle it, especially around the area where my pants meet my socks.
Good. Thanks a lot. Hey, we've got a question about times of day to go birding. Do you have any special favorite times of day?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm a night owl, but really early is really good. Birds are hungry, they're cold, they're really active, and they tend not to be as skittish really early in the day. They're feeding actively, and they're a little more prone to predation as a result. But they're out in the open, and they're busy trying to stay alive for the next half hour. In some locations, if you're not out at dawn, from maybe dawn till an hour and a half, 2 hours later, you're probably not going to see many birds. That's especially true in rainforests. So early in the day, and then quite often within a couple hours of sunset, a lot of birds get really active for kind of the last feeding of the day before they go quiet. They try to get to a roost spot early to minimize the chances of predation.
Okay, I have one more question and then one comment, and we're going to cut it off. Okay, so this is from Deborah, and the question is, here on the Central Coast, what's your favorite spot to go birding?
Oh gosh, it's hard to pick out one. The estuary is amazing all year round.
In Morro Bay.
In Morro Bay, yep. Estero Bluffs, north of Cayucas is great. Bluff Trails at Montaña de Oro. We live in one of the most bird-rich places on the planet. The diversity around here is incredible. Morro Coast Audubon website lists all of these great locations, what you can expect to find there, when are the best times to go, directions to them and the like. And then the field trips that are offered will quite often get you to those spots, and you'll see some wonderful stuff. I led a trip on Monday of this week to Oso Flaco Lake, and that's another stunning place that goes through at least 5 different distinct habitats and provides great birding.
Speaking of Oso Flaco Lake, we have a speaker, Steve Bessinger, who will be talking about black rails, and that'll be coming up in a couple of days. Looking forward to that. You mentioned about prices coming down and quality going up for binoculars and scopes.
Yeah.
One of our supporters is Out of This World. That's the name of the company, and they have offered us some discounts. So if you were looking for a discount on the binocular or scope, what I need you to do is you go to the Morro Bay website, and there's a line there, or just email support@morrobayfestival.org, and we will get you the discount code. Obviously, we're not going to make it public, but if you want a discount on binoculars or scopes, email to just support at morrobaybirdfestival.org. That'll be on the final slide too. The other thing is, if you need to talk to Mark directly, email him there, and that will be a place where we can get in contact with him. As we put up the final slide here, remember our donation options. If you're able, you can donate in several ways, including the 2 QR codes right there on the screen. If you want to donate by Venmo to the left or PayPal to the right, that would be very helpful. We're going to be closing down this Zoom room now because next up is Jessica Griffiths, one of my favorite presenters, on why birds flock. So this is the time for you to go to the bathroom, come on back. We are going to shut the room down because we got to find Jessica in these hundreds of people. So we're going to shut it down and open it up again. Come on back with the same exact meeting code in a couple of minutes, and we'll see you at the top of the hour. Thanks, Mark. Appreciate everything you shared with us, and we'll see you in a little bit with Jessica Griffiths. All right, bye-bye, everybody.